Thank you very, very much. I want to thank Congressman David Rivera, who's been such a great help and has been so important in our reaching out to the entire Miami-Dade community. I also want to thank Congressman Dan Burton, who showed such tremendous persistence in the mid-90s as we negotiated the Helms-Burton Act with the Clinton administration. I want to point out that they have always waived Part 3 of that, and I want you to know that as president, I will not waive it. I negotiated with Clinton to get it done. I also want to say that my wife, Calista, and I are delighted to be here today and to have a chance to be with you. And we're also delighted to have our daughter, Kathy, who lives in Key Biscayne and is she's our representative at Versailles, at Univision, Telemundo, and every other source, Radio Mambi, wherever we can convince her to go and speaking out for us. I want to also thank Mayor Moronio for coming here today and former Mayor Joe Carollo for being here. And I also want to tell you how proud I am that our campaign in Florida is being led by Jose Malaya, who did such a great job for Marco Rubio and has such a thorough understanding of the state. I want to talk about Latin America and about the challenges we face. But before that, I just want to comment on one thing in the State of the Union last night, which I'm not sure the President understood. But if he actually meant what he said, it would be a disaster of the first order. He had a very clever political promise that we ought to make sure that everybody who earns $1 million pays at least 30% taxes, which sounds terrific on the surface. It's perfectly classic left-wing demagoguery. It would double the capital gains tax. Doubling the capital gains tax would lead to a dramatic decline in the stock market, which would affect every pension fund in the United States. It would affect every person who has a 401k. It would affect the creation of jobs. It would drive capital out of the United States. It would, in fact, force people to invest overseas. And it would be the most anti-jobs single step he could take. Now, there's a possibility the President just didn't understand what he was saying. But if he, in fact, and I think the White House this morning is going to have to explain this, if, in fact, he meant what he said, I think it is an enormous problem for the American economy. Now, my view has been very different than the President's. As you know, Governor Romney paid about 15%. The President would like to raise that dramatically. I actually want to offer an optional flat tax for you that would have you pay 15%. And so I would like to lower taxes so you could pay the same amount as Romney. He would like to raise Romney's taxes to pay as much as he can get out of him. I am for lower taxes and smaller government. Obama's for higher taxes and bigger government, and that sort of states where we are. And I actually think in Latin American history there's a great deal of warning about the Obama approach. Argentina was one of the wealthiest countries in the world prior to Juan Perón. And Peronism, which wrecked the economy, redistributed wealth dramatically, expanded the size of government, politicized the entire system, has crippled Argentina ever since. Because they cannot break out of the cycle of bad government and bad policies. And I think it's very important to understand that these things that are nice or rhetorical speeches can lead to policies that destroy economies. And we've seen it happen over and over again. By contrast, there are also lessons to be learned from Latin America that are positive. Chile has had the most advanced Social Security program in the world. For over 30 years, Chileans have been allowed to put their money into a savings account, not turn it over to politicians, but actually save it. And their Social Security system has produced 2 to 3 times the return per person that a traditional government-dominated, bureaucratically managed system does. This is not a theory, this is a fact. We've had over 30 years of experience with it. In the worst economic times, the Chilean system produces greater returns than a traditional program. The reason you know that is the Chilean system has a safety net. And if you fall below the safety net, the government makes up the difference. In 30 years, they have written 0 checks because nobody has ever fallen below the number. So there's a lot we can learn from Latin America. There's a lot we can learn good, and there's a lot we can learn to avoid. Chile has an example of something very important, and I talked recently with Jose Pineda, who was the creator of the Chilean system, who's very willing to come to the U.S. and talk to students about how much better off they would be if they had the right to invest in a personal Social Security savings account with a lifetime of buildup with compound interest, which would actually reduce the wealth disparity in the United States by 50%, because every American worker, when they first started, would become a saver and an investor and would have an estate of their own. So it's a remarkable program, and it's an example that you can learn from Latin America, and you can learn things we should be doing. Now, I want to talk, first of all, in general. I was very struck about 1963 by Milton Eisenhower. He was President Eisenhower's older brother. Milton Eisenhower wrote a book called The Wine is Bitter. And it basically said the United States was neglecting Latin America, and that the result was that problems were getting worse. This was 4 years into the Castro dictatorship. It's a very troubling book, and it has remained true ever since. We spend far more energy and intelligent management and resources on Iraq or Pakistan or Afghanistan than we do in Latin America. Just go look at the size of the Southern Command in Miami and compare it to CENTCOM, and you'll see the difference. Yet Latin America is central to our future. This is the neighborhood we're in. And when Pope John Paul II talked about a continent of hope, he meant all of North and South America combined, and was really talking about a hemisphere of hope. And so I think the United States has to have very fundamental changes. Now, I realize the president made a lot of promises which he failed to keep, and I think that's unfortunate, because his words are at times pretty good. So let me describe to you what I think we need to do. First of all, we need to dramatically strengthen the Southern Command. We need to recognize how important Latin America is. And we need to take Mexico, which for bizarre reasons is currently in the Northern Command, and we need to transfer it to the Southern Command, because nobody in the Northern Command has a clue why they have Mexico, and it doesn't work very well. The fact is Mexico is a part of Latin America and should be treated as a part of Latin America. And at that point, we also have to recognize this is our most populous neighbor. We have an enormous vested interest in helping the Mexican government win the war with the drug cartels. It is a tragedy, the level of violence underway in Mexico. A lot of it is fueled by American money, by Americans buying drugs. And in effect, we are funding a war that we should make sure the government of Mexico wins. I helped support and sponsor Plan Colombia, and Plan Colombia has been enormously successful. La Violencia had dominated Colombian life since 1947. The combination of the FARC and the drug dealers literally threatened to shatter the country. And through Plan Colombia, with great local leadership, including President Uribe, the people of Colombia regained control of their own country and regained control for civil society. We need to have that willingness to develop and work with people in Mexico and in Central America to engage in problems. When MS-13 members come to America and get sophisticated in gang warfare and are then deported so that the gang member has more sophistication than the local police, we really owe it to Guatemala, to Honduras, to El Salvador, to make sure that we are helping them contain and defeat the gang members, many of whom learned their violent techniques in the United States. We also have an obligation in the United States to modify our deportation laws so that people who are members of gangs who aren't citizens aren't here. And the fact is, these are very dangerous gangs, and they threaten to unravel the very fabric of society. But we owe more than that. We owe all of Latin America a commitment to prosperity, to the rule of law, to the right of private property, a commitment to transparency and accountability and honest government, and to recognize that to truly be a good neighbor, we want to help every part of Latin America achieve that kind of future. The fact is, many years ago, I started talking with and studying Hernando de Soto, a Peruvian economist whose understanding of the challenges of developing countries, I think, is probably the best in the world. And he pointed out that in virtually every country, you have people who are outside the law, but not criminals. This started when he had graduate students in in Lima, and they went out and they looked, instead of talking about theoretical things, they went out and interviewed people. What did they actually do? How did they do it? They found out that 98% of the buses in Lima were outside the law. They didn't have a license because it was too hard to get a license. So they just didn't get one. Now, because people actually had to worry about getting to work, if the bus got into into a wreck with a car, they'd have a local informal court because they couldn't go to court because if they went to court, the bus would be repossessed. And nobody could afford for the bus to be repossessed because it's how they went to work. And so they built this entire informal society around the fact that the law served the very rich, but it didn't serve normal people. And if you've never read DeSoto's works, he has 2 or 3 books that are just breathtakingly brilliant about what we need to be encouraging. We need to encourage private property ownership. We need to encourage the rule of law so people feel secure that if they earn money and they save money, it's not going to be stolen by politicians. We need to encourage transparency in government. And these are things we should be proud of and we should be working for, and the people of Latin America should see clearly that the people of the United States want Latin America to be a prosperous, successful region, and that we're prepared to work to help people live in safety and within the rule of law. There are certain very specific places we have to focus on. Now, I think the president has been almost exactly going in the wrong direction on Cuba. I believe we need to take a very clear position that over 50 years of dictatorship is more than enough. And I think it's fascinating. Consider the Obama administration's policy. They worry about an Arab Spring in Tunisia. They worry about an Arab Spring in Libya. They actually commit forces to covertly help in Libya. They worry about an Arab Spring in Egypt, where we give billions of dollars of aid every year. They worry about an Arab Spring in Syria. I don't think it's ever occurred to a single person in the White House to look south and propose a Cuban Spring. I would argue if Mubarak was bad, Castro's worse. If Assad is bad, Castro's worse. My commitment is very simple. I will use every non-military tool that President Reagan, Prime Minister Thatcher, and Pope John Paul II brought to bear on the Soviet Empire. If you go back and look at the campaign they waged from the Pope's succession in October of 1978 through Reagan's being sworn in January of 1981, and you look at how the 3 of them brought moral pressure, psychological pressure, information pressure, economic pressure, covert assistance. Things like Solidarity were being propped up with money from lots of sources, given technology from lots of sources. I just want to suggest to you that an all-out American effort in alliance with the Cuban people to facilitate the future of Cuba, and a clear message to younger members of the dictatorship that they are not going to succeed. There will not be a succession to Castro. That, in fact, that if they want a positive, prosperous future, it will be in a democracy, because we are, in fact, not going to allow a negative future of a new generation of dictators replacing the Castro brothers. Let me also suggest that beyond Cuba, we have a very major problem growing in Venezuela. The fact is that Hugo Chavez is a bitter, deep anti-American, seeking to create an alliance with Ahmadinejad, which is the first overt violation of the Monroe Doctrine since the 1820s. I think it's fairly clear. I mean, John F. Kennedy went to the brink of nuclear war over Soviet intervention in Cuba because we would not tolerate an enemy power from the old world coming into the new hemisphere. I think we have to make very clear there will not be an Iranian penetration of Latin America, and we will take whatever steps are necessary to block the Iranians from acquiring military bases or other assets in Latin America, because it's an intolerable threat. We should also confront Chavez head on. I mean, there have been few, in an administration with many embarrassing moments, there have been few more embarrassing than when the president met Hugo Chavez. And Chavez made a fool of him, giving him as a gift an anti-American book, and having Obama thank him for this wonderful and wise book, because he didn't have a clue what he was getting, which is true, frankly, of much of Obama's visits around the planet. I think we need to say calmly and pleasantly to Chavez, we know who you are, we believe what you say, and therefore we regard you as a mortal enemy of the United States. Let me also say that we have a program. If you go to newt.org, you'll see a proposed 21st century contract with America. We have a very bold program that's almost the exact opposite of last night's State of the Union. We propose zero capital gains, so hundreds of billions of dollars pour into the United States to create jobs. We propose 100% expensing, so we can write off all new equipment in 1 year, so we become the most modern, most productive system in the world, so we rebuild our manufacturing base, and we are the best producers and best exporters on the planet. We propose modifying unemployment compensation so that every American worker who needs unemployment compensation can get it only if they sign up for a business training course. So while we are compensating them, they are learning and improving their skills. So we rebuild the human capital of the United States. So you have new machinery and newly trained people simultaneously. We propose a 12.5% corporate tax rate, which is the Irish tax rate, lower even than Canada's. But first of all, it will bring home about $700 billion in profits that are currently locked up overseas by our high tax rate. Second, it makes our companies very competitive in the world market. And third, it enables us to actually have General Electric pay taxes. Because at 12.5%, they will lay off half their lawyers and write the check because it will be cheaper. In addition, we abolished the death tax permanently so that successful families can focus on job creation and building bigger and more productive businesses. And as I said earlier, we offer to the individuals a choice of staying with the current tax code with all its complexity and all of its paperwork, or adopting a 15% flat tax, which you put in the amount you earned, the number of dependents, 15%, one page, it's over. Hong Kong has run a two-part system. We'll also, in the near future, be proposing a series of changes to make it easier to live overseas as an American and to be an exporter of American goods and services. Every American business person who lives overseas increases dramatically the sale of American products. Yet we've adopted a tax code which makes it harder to hire Americans overseas and easier to hire other nationalities. If you look at the changes in our tax code that made it more expensive for Americans to be overseas, for example, in the Middle East, you'll find American engineers began to disappear, and they began to be replaced by Korean and other engineers because the tax code favored hiring somebody who wasn't an American. Now, for us to make it difficult to be an American salesperson around the world is foolish. We want to have the broadest possible trade agreements. We want to be competitive in Brazil. We want to be competitive in Argentina. We want to be competitive in Mexico. We want to help grow a healthy economy throughout all of Central America and the Caribbean. In the long run, prosperous, successful neighbors are a lot better neighbors than people who are desperate. And so we have a vested interest in growing together. And we want to develop the plan I'm outlining leads to such massive economic growth. When I left the speakership, we were down to 4.2% unemployment. When you get down to 4.2% unemployment, you can begin to have a truly dramatic impact, and you can afford to be competitive everywhere, and it just changes your whole capacity to get things done. Let me say finally, we need a lot of changes in immigration. But people don't realize we also need changes in legal processes. Our current visa system is a mess. And it makes no sense to make it more complicated to come here legally than it is to come here illegally. But the fact is today, it takes a long time, a lot of money. It is a destructive program, badly run by the State Department. It needs to be totally overhauled. We want people to come to the United States legally. We want them to, certainly in Miami, you want them to come here and do business. You want them to come here and shop. You want them to come here and get on a cruise line. The people at Disney would make a lot more money if it was easier for people to go to Disney World. But we have some countries where it takes an amazing amount of time and inconvenience to get a visa just to come visit. And it's run by State Department officials who have no interest in making it easy for people to come here legally. And I think that's a huge mistake. So I think you'll find that we're going to work very, very hard on that. And that's a part of how we have to relate across the continent. We want people to flow back and forth freely, legally, and effectively, because that enables us to increase the understanding at a human level, and it enables us to increase the amount of commerce we do across the region. I think that we're in a different world, and I think we're going to have to rethink a lot of things. We're in a different world because you have the rise of China. We're in a different world because we have radical Islamism. We're in a different world because parts of Latin America are becoming very big. You look at the size of the Brazilian economy. This is a different world. You look at the importance of Mexico and the population of Mexico. This is a different world. And so I think we have to have, in a new president and a new administration, a fundamental resetting of how we think about things. The truth is, Europe is relatively less important. Latin America is relatively more important. The fact is that we have to pay attention to our own region because it so directly affects our lives, and because we have so many Americans with relatives. I mean, we have a deep vested interest in countries like El Salvador or Honduras or Nicaragua or Colombia or Venezuela or Cuba. So all of these things we have to do. I want to say one last area of concern. I think we have to rethink from the ground up how we approach foreign aid and how we try to help countries. I am deeply concerned that more than 80 years after we first intervened in Haiti, the people of Haiti still have very difficult and very painful lives. It seems to me that if you have a country of that size, off the shore of the most powerful economy in the world, the most complex society in the world, the most powerful military in the world, that surely our various interventions over the last 80+ years should have led to a better future for the average Haitian. And I think we have to really rethink from the ground up what's worked and what hasn't worked. How do we rethink what we're doing? We have an interest, just as humans. We have a moral obligation. I truly believe our Declaration of Independence, which says that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That wasn't written just as an American document. It was written as a universal document. The Founding Fathers believed that they said we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They didn't say all Americans. They were writing a document for the human race. And that means that we have some moral burden to think about the people of Haiti, who clearly have had the most painful national life of any country in our hemisphere in terms of poverty and disorganization and lack of opportunity. We have to break the totalitarian dictatorship of Cuba, but you all know that the morning that we unleash the people of Cuba, they're going to spring to prosperity, they're going to spring to vitality, they're going to be part of the world market. We know that. But we don't have that level of confidence today in helping young Haitians lead a decent life. And yet, when Haitians do come to the U.S., they're instantly absorbed. They're creative, hardworking, rise in prosperity, are very, very successful. And so I want you to know that I am committed to rethink, both in our hemisphere and around the world, what hasn't worked in some 60 years of trying to help people? Why are there pockets of poverty so painful that it clearly is a violation of our Creator's grant of a right to pursue happiness? And so I think we have to be concerned at that level with a totally new approach and a totally new way of thinking about it. Finally, I do want to mention one of my dear friends who is, I understand, entertained you earlier today, somebody who is a personal example of what Fidel has cost Cuba and what Fidel has gained America, in Luis Haza, who is just such a great musician. Luis was a child prodigy who fled Cuba because of Castro, which enriched our country. He was the first chair in the National Symphony. He is a magnificent artist, as you heard earlier. And one of the great joys that Clist and I have, he's actually teaching our granddaughter. It's really great. And if you talk to Luis, you understand the passion that he has lectured me with over the years and why my determination to free Cuba and to help the people of Cuba be free is so deep, because he is a deep, deep advocate for human freedom and decency and dignity as it applies to Cuba. Let me close with what Dan Burton was saying. You have every reason to go back home and say, okay, so one more presidential candidate dropped by and said one more bunch of stuff, and he knows who we are, so he sort of said what we want to hear. So why should you believe me? Well, because in fact, as Speaker of the House, I argued and fought and negotiated with Bill Clinton to get the Helms-Burton Act. Because as a member of the House, I worked and fought to have Radio Marti and Television Marti. Because in fact, I worked with Lincoln Diaz Balart and got NACARA passed. Because when I've had authority in the past, I have kept my word. I have worked on Latin American issues. I have been concerned about the future of freedom across the region, and I have a track record to prove it. And I am the only candidate in this race who actually has methodically done things that actually mattered. So I really look forward to your help. I think that it is possible for us to have a new dawn of freedom across Latin America, a new dawn of prosperity, and a new dawn of having a hemisphere of hope, north and south, working together to create a better future for everyone. Thank you. Good luck, and God bless you.